You do it. Make your dreams come true. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Just do it.
In those years, what did you aspire to do? Did you aspire to become a very wealthy person? Would you want to be buying stocks? Would you want to buy companies? What was your aspiration in those early days?
I loved just analyzing securities. I just spent hours and hours and hours. I kept turning the pages of Moody's, which instead of going, you had no internet then or anything else, so you had two sources of information, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and we happened to have these sets of Moody's. They were about, in aggregate, probably about 8,000 pages, about 5 different manuals, and I went through those page by page.
And, well, it must have been exciting.
Yeah, it's a little strange. I mean, I actually went to Amazon a few years ago and I found an old 1951 Moody's. Now, everybody else is going there for Playboy magazine, but I'm ordering the old Moody's. You've got a strange guy here. It's enormously important to have the right heroes in life, and then it's enormously important that they never let you down. And I've been unbelievably fortunate in having those heroes, perhaps a dozen or so, led by my father and my first wife, and they had a huge impact on me, but a number of other people have as well. And never in my life have I felt I was let down by them. I tell the students, the most important job they have, for most of them, is going to be the teacher of their children. And you start out as your children's hero, and you don't get a second chance at living that role out. That child looks to you and forms its opinion of the world, its attitude, its behavior, starting with what they see in you. And I had enormous good fortune in that respect. I had, in the investing world, I had Ben Graham, I had my partner Charlie Munger, who taught me all kinds of things. There's several members of our board of directors have had a huge influence on my life. So it is important to have the right heroes and select them with care. But when you find them, you will be a better person if you look at the qualities in them that you admire, and then you say, why can't I have these same qualities? I mean, that's the beauty of wonderful heroes, is that you get to see in action behavior that inspires you, and then you have to ask yourself the question, why can't I behave in a similar manner? And you will be a better person because of that. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to talk to you about Ben Graham. I've had some lucky days in my life, but one of the luckiest was in 1949 when I was 19 years old in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I picked up a copy of The Intelligent Investor. It not only changed my investment philosophy, it really changed my whole life. I'd be a different person in a different place if I hadn't have first seen that book. I got a bedrock of investment philosophy that really hasn't changed ever since I read the book. I may embellish on it a little here and there, but it was Ben's ideas that sent me down the right path. And then a year or so later, I very belatedly applied to Columbia University, and Dave Dodd let me in, and I got to know Ben personally when he was my professor in the second semester there. And when I finished up, of course, I said I'd go to work for him for nothing, and he said I was overpriced, and he probably was right. But a few years later, I got a letter from him, and he said, next time you're in New York, I'd like to talk to you. And I made a point of being there about 24 hours later, and he offered me a job. And I didn't ask the salary, but fortunately, at the end of the first month, I found out he'd not taken me, or maybe he'd forgotten about the fact that I'd do it for nothing. And I got inspired working for him, just being around him every day. And then we developed this friendship, which lasted until he died about 25 years later. So I really had a quarter of a century of experience with a marvelous man. And you all know about his mind and his ideas and the influence they've had on the profession of security analysis, the influence they probably had on you and your own portfolios, and certainly me. But the human side was just as impressive. He was a generous man. When my first son was born, shortly after I went back to take the job in December of 1954, my son was born, and I gave him the middle name of Graham. I named him after my dad, Howard, and then after Ben Graham with the middle name of Graham. And Ben came over to our apartment in White Plains and gave me a camera and a movie projector. It was a lot different doing that sort of thing in those days. And so I could record what was happening with Howard Graham Buffett from virtually the moment he was born. A little later, I think my wife had said something to him about my lack of dancing ability or something, which was well justified. And Ben gave me a certificate for some free lessons at the Arthur Murray Dance Studio in White Plains. That may have been the worst investment he ever made. It was he did not get his money's worth when he did that. He moved out to California in 1956, and my family visited him time after time, and he was always encouraging. The one thing about it is that you never could balance the books with Ben. He would do things for me or for other members of the family, and you never could think of anything to do for him. So it's a real pleasure for me in a small way to be able to attempt to balance the books by just telling you and the rest of the world what a wonderful human being he was. And that's what really counts. I mean, he couldn't help but be smart. I mean, he was born wired in a way where he was going to be able to accomplish things intellectually that very, very few people could do. And when you think about, particularly in the light of today's markets, think what a remarkable achievement it was to be writing a book in 1934, security analysis. Probably was writing it in 1932 and 3, and here was a man that had been devastated by the Depression and the stock market crash. You know, many of you manage money. He was managing money for people, and they were disappointed with what had happened. But he could see far enough out in the future that he still turned out this marvelous book in a dispassionate, very rational way, and not overwhelmed by the events of the previous couple of years. But he wrote a book where 75 or so years later, we're still reading it to learn new things every day. So it was a marvelous intellectual achievement. But again, that he couldn't help that. He was born with that brain. He didn't have to be the wonderful human being he was. I mean, he could have behaved in an arrogant manner or had a tone of superiority because he had to know he was smarter than 99.99% of the people around him. But he wasn't that kind of a person at all. He treated all of us students, came up to Columbia on a Thursday for 20 or 25 years for just to help out a bunch of students that he might never see again, that weren't going to do anything for him. He was sharing knowledge that, in effect, was going to make them competitors. I bought some of the same stocks that Graham Newman was buying, his investment company, later on. I didn't buy them in very big quantities because they didn't have that kind of money. But he was creating competitors. It didn't bother him. He used current examples. We would sit there in class, and he would tell us about things that we never would have found on our own. But he was just a generous man in every way. And I was lucky to know him, and I hope you've gotten to know him a little bit through these comments.
All right, as we're talking about CEOs, I'm going to ask you the $60 million question, which is, how do you pay a CEO to keep him as vitally interested in the outcome of the business?
Well, we have 70-some CEOs, in a sense, through these businesses. I'm the shareholder. I'm the comp committee. They have the business, but I got the stock certificate. So I am really I've got the same problem your investors do. How do I treat these people fairly, keep them motivated, keep them in sync with my objectives? Mm-hmm. Now, the easiest thing to do is to buy into a business where they already are 95% of the way there, and where they think like owners to start with. If they don't think like owners, I can't put that into them. But if they do think like owners, and our managers do, mm-hmm. I want to keep that feeling. 3/4 of our managers are independently rich, but they don't want to be treated unfairly. Nobody wants to be treated unfairly. So I am the comp committee, and I have got comp arrangements for dozens and dozens of managers. And it doesn't take me 15 minutes a year. We've never had a comp consultant, never will. And we have a record of keeping our managers. I can't think of a manager in 45 years that's left us to go to some competitor. We don't have a retirement age. You know, I'm 79 and I'm just interning at the moment. My partner is 86, Charlie Munger, and he says I'll grow up someday. And we have managers that are in their 80s. You know, and we look for people that have a passion for their business, know it well, and love it more than anything else. They can't stand bad results, you know, over time. And we don't measure them by we don't get budgets from them. I don't believe in making earnings projections for Berkshire, because if I make earnings projections, those people will cheat in order to make me look good, and you can't keep cheating forever, and I don't want them to start. So I don't get budgets from them. A lot of them use budgets in their business, some of them don't, but that's up to them. They all have different styles. The comp reflects the nature of the business there. We have some businesses that are capital intensive. Well, we need to have capital in the formula. We have other businesses where capital has nothing to do with it, so we leave that out. Back when newspapers had enormous economic strength, an orangutan could run a newspaper and have 15% pre-tax margin. So we didn't pay for the first 15 points because we weren't going to pay the orangutan. Above 15, we paid. You know, so we have all kinds of different arrangements. They got a couple things in common. One, they're simple. The second is they don't change from year to year. We don't move the target around.
Good.
Yeah, and see, they're rational in terms of the nature of the business. We've got some very tough businesses and we've got some very easy businesses. I mean, it's just, you have that if you have 70 businesses, and we're not going to pay somebody, you know, that starts on third base, you know, the same thing for getting home as some guy that starts at home plate and has to round all the bases. I think it's very difficult in terms of, you're right, we own stock in companies where I don't agree with everything they're doing, you know, but, you know, I'm sure my kids don't agree with everything I do. I mean, you can't expect 100% adherence to anything, any of your particular beliefs or values with any other large institution. So if we own stock in the ABC company or the XYZ company, they'll probably be doing something I wouldn't do, you know, at some point. We don't feel a responsibility for that when we own the stock of the company. I mean, if we have control over a company, we want it to be run in a way that you could describe their activities on the front page of the paper and no one would be embarrassed about it. I don't believe in using, at Berkshire Hathaway level, I tell the subsidiaries, the ones we buy, keep doing what you do in the philanthropic area. Just don't give to your personal causes, but anything you do for your communities, whatever it may be, you just keep following those policies. You don't need to check them with us. I have no idea what, you know, of our 76 companies, who gives how much to charity or which charities they give to or anything else. They handle those matters themselves. At the Berkshire Hathaway holding company level, I do not believe in giving away our shareholders' money. I think that that's their money to determine and they should make the decision on it. But I don't think it's my job at Berkshire to take the 400,000 shareholders who have entrusted me with money. I don't think it's my job to start allocating them to whatever I think is the most important charity. I think the thing to do is let them allocate their own funds. My wife reminds me. I was lucky enough to be wired a certain way. I mean, you know, and if you're lucky, you're lucky. I mean, if I've been born with the right adenoids or something, you know, maybe I could have been a great singer, but I wouldn't have deserved any credit for that either. There's a lot of luck in life, and I've had it. So I don't feel guilty about it in the least, but I do feel appreciative. You know, I was born into a very fortunate country. I was male when, if I'd been female, I wouldn't have had the same opportunity. I was white when, if I'd been black, I wouldn't have had the same opportunity. I had, in particular, a father who gave me unconditional love, you know, throughout my life. He didn't give me unconditional approval. And I gave him plenty of reasons to withhold unconditional approval, but you know, I have done what I was sort of cut out to do, and I've been lucky enough to be able to work at something that I've loved all my life. I sold shirts for J.C. Penney when I was about 17, And I stood on my feet all day and tried to sell people a $3.98 shirt instead of a $2.98 shirt when they came in. That wasn't that much fun. You know, so I have gotten to do things that are fun, you know, and I should be appreciative, and I'm not ashamed of it, but I'm not enormously proud of it either. I mean, it's just the way it was the hand that life dealt me, and I got dealt a very good hand. When I met Bill on July 5th, 1991, I think we probably spent 10 or 11 hours talking.
Yeah, two things that I picked up after meeting you. Bridge was one and golf was another. Yeah. I was never a good golfer, and it was an excuse to talk. It certainly wasn't about golfing. Whenever I see something, you know, take these very low interest rates, even negative interest rates, I'm always thinking, boy, I'm looking forward to talking to Warren about that. One thing that's fun is you have a very optimistic view about things.
I think if I'm a sort of neutral in terms of optimism or pessimism, and I look at the facts around me, I look at what has happened in my lifetime. You know, put three of me end to end, and you're back before the Declaration of Independence was written. That progress in 3 lifetimes like mine it's mind-blowing.
Since I've known you, you've always been good at taking finance things and making them simple. Do you think that came naturally, or did you learn over time just answering questions about finance decade after decade?
I started teaching a course when I was 21 years old at the University of Omaha. I did that because I was terrified of public speaking earlier, and I'd taken a Dale Carnegie course, and I felt I just had to get out there and start talking. Standing up for 2 hours in front of a class helped me in learning to explain things.
Well, it's amazing how you've gone through market periods that are utterly different, and yet your basic rules about what to do remain unchanged.
Yeah, the rules work. They're not the easiest to apply. They won't tell you exactly when to buy or sell, obviously, but you'll never do anything stupid if you follow some fairly simple principles. When you get a chance to buy something of extraordinary value, whether it's a farm or an apartment house or a piece of a business or an entire business, the time to do it is then, and not worry about whether you could do it a little cheaper a month later or 2 months later.
Warren makes unique compensation agreements for the people who work for him. And having thought through how do you incent good behavior, what's the best thing for the long term, I've learned a lot of how you think about compensation.
Basically, I want the paintbrush to be in their hand. And then when they paint something that they think is beautiful and I think is beautiful, I want to cheer like crazy for them.
I was in the world of writing software, being an engineer, and he was in the world of picking stocks. And I just had never been attracted to that for myself. And yet, as soon as he was asking me about IBM or Hewlett-Packard and how they priced their product and how things were changing and what the nature of the competition was and what I would do if I got to run those companies, I could see that his investing was just an outcome from having this incredible model of business and business value. And so, you know, I got to ask him lots of questions, and our first meeting turned into a day-long discussion, and I was, you could say, you know, smitten by the opportunity to talk with Warren about all these topics. Well, the way Warren has it structured, you have an incredible person doing everything that needs to be done. But it's kind of inverted where Warren is picking the business for its dynamics, buying often 100% of it. And there's actually more value in the fully owned businesses now than in the investment portfolio. And because he's picked a manager who's dedicated to the details, the specifics of that business, he gets a world-class operator. He's simply taking whatever excess capital comes out and redeploying it in a business that can grow its opportunities because of that. So the dialogue between Warren and the manager is, you know, is the manager still excited about his job, still dedicated to it? So rarely there'll have to be a succession. And then the capital issue. Does that person want more capital than they've made because they have opportunities, or are they generating capital? And then Warren takes and spreads that around the different things inside the company. So Warren does what Warren is incredibly good at, including picking that person, But it doesn't include knowing the pricing of the jewelry or the, should there be a new box of candy brought out or anything like that. It's always amazing. You can describe a business to Warren in 10 or 15 minutes, and he'll know what the key things to ask and look for are. He doesn't need massive briefing on something. In fact, one time when we took Warren to visit Microsoft, he was here for the weekend, and I thought, geez, we should show him around. He'd be interested to see it. So after we'd spent about a half day doing it, he says, now I've toured Microsoft more than any business that I own. Because on-site tours are not part of how he does his analysis. He's a unique leader. I can't think of anyone close. Sure, there have been great CEOs who understood their particular company and built something phenomenal. But in terms of breadth and thoughts about business itself and how it helps society, how it should be done, Warren is singular in my view. No one will be as good as Warren Buffett. No company can expect that. But this is an unbelievable franchise. Its economic value will continue to go up. Warren calls it his painting. And he's done it in a way that it's based on principles that will endure. And so it'll be a great company. Certainly Warren is owed that. And, I feel with the way he's got them set up and the people will help out, that's going to be a